Welcome back. Today I'm going to be addressing specifically knife sharpening. Now I'll do a separate video on how to sharpen axes, but today we're going to be sharpening this knife. Now this has been my personal knife for a couple months. I have not sharpened it a single time since I made it, and I've been using it pretty hard for the past couple months. Now I wouldn't recommend doing that, and there's ways to keep your edge maintained to where you never actually have to sharpen it, but in the event that your knife gets a little dull, I'm going to be addressing how to sharpen it. Okay, so for all sharpening, I recommend learning how to do it freehand. Now there are ways you can do it not freehand, but it's a really good skill to learn how to sharpen freehand, because you can sharpen anything from a knife to an axe to a draw knife. Any tool you want, you can sharpen with this method. So what I typically use is I use this double-sided stone. Now this has a coarse side and a finer side. This is just like a cheap hardware stone, and I think that works just fine. And then you're also going to need a leather strap and some jeweler's rouge. Now this is used for polishing jewelry on buffing wheels, and it's a super fine abrasive, and you'll see how that comes into play later. Anyway, we're gonna start with the stone. Now, our knife is very dull, and I like testing sharpness by running my fingers kind of sideways along the blade, and if it doesn't catch in your kind of fingerprint ridges, it's not particularly sharp. This would definitely not shave, and this is just something that you'll kind of develop over time with a feel, and you'll kind of be able to know what's sharp and what isn't. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab myself a pen, and I'm going to just mark the very edge of this guy. And this is going to be a good indication to make sure that our angle is correct. With all sharpening, it's just about removing material at specific angles. That angle doesn't necessarily matter, but it does depend on whatever tool you're sharpening. That angle will change. Now, this is kind of a hard use knife, so the edge is a little bit more robust, and it's definitely not going to be sharpened the same way as like a kitchen knife. So we're going to get a little bit more marker on here. And what I recommend doing is about a 20 to 25 degree angle on here. Now with freehand sharpening, it's all going to be kind of guesswork. But what I typically do is I have my stone, and I'm going to start on the coarse side. I'm going to start at 90 degrees, bring it down to 45, and then half of 45, and that'll get you kind of in the right ballpark of the correct angle. Now, some people recommend pushing forward, pulling back, going in circles, and it really doesn't matter, because as long as you're removing material at the correct angle, it doesn't matter how you do it. So the reason I have the Sharpie on there is that'll show us how we're sharpening and if we need to make adjustments. So I personally like pushing forward. That's just what's most comfortable to me. And I'll kind of push forward, and you can see there that the Sharpie marker is being removed right along the edge, and it's not being removed on one side or the other, and that means we are removing material at the correct angle. So if you're just removing Sharpie from up here, closer to the spine of the blade, it means that your angle is too shallow and you need to steepen it a little bit. And if you're removing the Sharpie just on the very tip of the edge and not the whole length of the secondary bevel, it means your angle is too steep and you need to make it a little shallower. And eventually you'll kind of get a feel for what needs to happen with all that, and you'll be able to do this pretty quick. So I'm gonna do a couple passes. The Sharpie's looking good. So once I've done that, I'm gonna now move to the other side and do the same thing. Now my angles change a little bit from side to side, which is something that I'm working on, but it's just something to keep aware. If you notice one side is a little different than the other, you can make that adjustment. So the goal with sharpening, a dull edge, let's say, is rounded, okay? And we need to remove enough material from the side of that edge to bring it to a point. Now what happens when we bring it to a point is a little bit of material is going to get pushed up a little bit, and that's known as a burr. Now we're trying to get that burr, because that burr means we've taken our rounded dull edge and we've fully sharpened it to a point so much so where a little bit of that material has raised up. And that is a good indication that the entire edge is sharpened. So on the opposite side of the stone, that's where you're gonna feel your burr. So if I'm working on this side, the burr is going to be appearing on this side of the blade. Now, how you can feel that is just simply by running your finger like this, and you'll feel it catch, especially with these lower grit stones. You'll feel your finger meat kind of catching on it, and you'll know it's there. And we want to be able to feel it along the whole length of the edge. Now, there's a little bit right here where it's not happening, so I'm just going to keep going until the entire length of the edge has that burr. Now, if it's taking a while to get that burr, I'd recommend switching on both sides to keep things even, but if it's just a couple passes, I don't think that's particularly important at this point. So, I'm feeling that burr along the whole length of the edge. So now I'm going to switch it to the other side to keep things even and raise that burr along the entire length of this side. Now, once you have that burr established, it's pretty easy to push it up on the other side, and the rest of the sharpening goes pretty quickly after that. Okay, so we need a little bit more right here and a little bit more at the tip. So that's just something that eventually you will kind of get the feel for. All right, so once you've raised the burr on both sides like I have, you technically have a sharpened knife. Now, we want to take this thing sharper, and the whole reason you go higher in the grits for the stone is that burr is going to get smaller and smaller and be easier to polish off. Therefore, you have a sharper blade. So I'm just going to be doing the exact same thing, same angle, and we want to push that burr up on both sides, and that's how we know we're refining this edge and getting it sharper. Now, I honestly don't get too crazy with this. This is maybe like a 400 or 600 grit equivalent, and I wouldn't personally go any higher than this. I think it's kind of a waste of time to go into like the 10,000 grit or whatever, because at the end of the day, we don't want to spend all day sharpening this damn thing, and we want to get back to work. And these are, everything I make is for work and for use. So any polished edge you have on there is just going to get not polished immediately. So I put a nice working edge on these things, and that's how I recommend they stay maintained. So raising the burr on this side, we're almost there. All right. So once we've raised that burr on the fine side, what I like to do to make it a little bit easier on the strop is I go with really light pressure once on each side. This is just my own personal thoughts on this, but it seems to make it a lot easier to polish that burr off if we do this. It's a super light pressure, just letting kind of the knife, the weight of the knife hold pressure here. All right, just like that. So we technically have a sharp knife. It feels sharp. I'm running my finger, I'm kind of pulling it along, and it's catching a little bit in my finger meat. But we want to get this thing to where it can shave hair. And that is where the strop comes into play. Now, unlike the stone, the direction that you use the strop is important. You always want to pull. You never want to push, otherwise you're going to cut it. So I would recommend doing one pull on each side. And what that will do is that will kind of wiggle that burr, break it off, and then really polish that edge. And this thing will get really, really sharp. Like hair shaving sharp. And this is how you can sharpen any tool, from knives to axes. It's all dependent on finding that angle with the stone initially. But with the stone and the strop, you'll get all your tools razor sharp. And it's a really good skill to learn, and would highly recommend doing it. So a couple swipes on the strop, and we can check it for sharpness. And it's feeling pretty good. It could use just a little bit more. And if you ever feel like it's not working as well as it could, you just need a little bit more of this stuff on there. And you can just scrape that right on there like that, and that'll help you out. So just do a little bit more stropping, and then this thing should be good to go. Now, here is how you can maintain your knife and never have to use a stone. If you strop it regularly enough, because it's actually polishing and honing the edge, if you do this before it gets too dull, you'll be able to bring an edge back to hair shaving sharp and not even have to touch a stone. So if you do it regularly enough, you'll never ever have to actually sharpen the knife. So that's just something to keep in mind. So that's feeling pretty sharp now. So I'm kind of feeling it catch in between the ridges of my fingerprint. And we can also, if we take our thumbnail and we kind of hold the knife at an angle, if it kind of catches without sliding down, that's also a really good way to test for sharpness. And you can also, if you have any arm hair, you can just do a little shave test. And that's typically what I like to do. And if it shaves hair, you're pretty good on the sharpness. Okay folks, so that's how I recommend sharpening your knife. Now, on a kitchen knife, you have a much shallower angle. On a bigger, harder use knife, you have a slightly steeper angle. Same with axes, so it's all about the angles. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. I'm more than willing to help because it's a skill that just takes time and practice to learn and develop. So there we go, that's how you get your Firekeeper Forge blade to hair shaving sharp in just a matter of minutes. If you strop it regularly enough without letting the edge get too dull, you'll never ever have to touch it to a stone. If there are any videos you'd like to see, let me know and I'll do my best to facilitate that happening. And thank you so much for watching. See ya.